All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are admitting the numerous registrants to this webinar, so give us a few seconds, and then we will get going very promptly. We have a very busy topic to cover tonight, so we don't want to waste any time. Welcome to all of you again. We are continuing to admit folks. We have a lot of registrants, and as soon as everybody is admitted as a participant, we will get this evening going. All right, I think we are ready to start. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Layla Law-Gisiko. I'm the president of the City Club of New York. The City Club of New York, in partnership with the Historic Districts Council, is thrilled to welcome you to this evening's webinar. We are here tonight to focus on the City of Yes for housing opportunity. This is a sweeping zoning proposal introduced by Mayor Adams to stimulate housing production. The proposal is entering its final stage. Today, the City Council members had a chance to hear from and ask questions to both Department of City Planning Director Dan Garodnick and HPD Commissioner Adolfo Carrion. The proposal, City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, would create a little bit of housing everywhere. It is a citywide proposal that would mostly uniformly apply. It has raised tremendous opposition for a broad set of reasons. And today we are joined by Council Member Chris Marte, who represents the Lower East Side, Chinatown, Battery Park City, and Tribeca. Council Member Marte spent his entire day in the council chamber today asking 2 rounds of questions. That's what the council members were permitted. He asked those questions to Dan Garodnick of the Department of City Planning and Adolfo Carrion of HPD. And after this marathon session, Councilmember Marte is here with us to help us get to the core of the proposal and to tell us, now that the proposal is in the hands of the City Council, what we can expect, what is no longer on the table, and how to prepare for tomorrow's public hearing. Because yes, tomorrow, it will be our turn, members of the public, to head to the City Council for the only public testimony held by the City Council on this monumental proposal. So without further delay, I am pleased to welcome Councilmember Marte. Councilmember, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you to all the organizers and all the participants who are here today. Yeah, it's a really big proposal, and I'm happy to start with a small presentation before
Fantastic.
we get into Q&As.
Excellent, excellent. So I think you are permitted to share your screen, so go ahead. And then I know that folks are pretty familiar with the general gist of this proposal, but it is so big and so dense, so we're very appreciative that you're giving us this presentation. The floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you. Yeah, so we all know what's upon us, especially at the City Council. It's the City of Yes. So what is the City of Yes? The City of Yes is 3 different citywide zoning amendment that Mayor Adams decided to do. So far, we have passed 2 of the 3. The first one we passed at the end of 2023, which is carbon neutrality, make our city greener, hopefully meet our climate goals. The second one that passed this summer was economic opportunity, how to revitalize business and our city's economy. And finally, we are here now with the housing opportunity. As Layla said at the top of the presentation, the whole housing opportunity idea is to build a little bit more housing everywhere. And, that sounds great, but there's a lot more to this proposal. There was actually 2,600 pages of this text amendment. And I'm not going to go over all of it, but I really want to go over some of the main points that my office has been really focused on and what we heard today during our first part of the City Council hearing. And so quickly, I just want to talk about the economic opportunity portion of it. And I really wanted to bring up this slide because it showed some of the major changes that we were able to do before it was voted upon in City Council. And, a lot of people have a lot of fear that the current version of housing opportunity is not what they want to see pass. And so this is really important because it shows that we made drastic changes that wasn't part of the original proposal for economic opportunity. For example, we banned residential conversions to commercial, right? If we want to have more housing, we shouldn't lose more housing for commercial, especially as we know commercial property is down throughout New York City. We were able to restrict the uses and the size for home occupation, what people can do in their apartment for work. In addition, we were able to restrict some of the allowances, especially manufacturing allowances in residential neighborhoods, right? Whether it's a residential tower in the financial district in my neighborhood, or in someone's 3-story building out in Queens, we wanted to make sure that whatever people were doing in their apartment didn't affect the quality of life of their neighbors or the environment in their community. And one of the most important things, especially for my district, which has a lot of public housing development, we requiring city planning to get city council approval for any commercial uses in NYCHA or Mitchell Alma campuses. That was really big because we know, for example, liquor stores or marijuana shops would take advantage of having these storefront locations in low-income communities. But we wanted to have the opportunity to say what can and should be going there, whether it's greener foods for like nice supermarkets or something that helps improve the quality of life and the opportunity for our residents. So this is really important because it shows that things can change even if we have just a few weeks until the city council votes. So what is housing opportunity and who's it for, right? Housing is an essential good. I believe housing is a right. And of course, we need supply, but we also constantly have the question of who is the supply for, and is it affordable, and is it an affordable to who, right? And so this general proposal really believes on a market-driven approach to affordability by removing zoning controls, deregulating a lot of the process, and creating a lot more as of right development throughout the city, which, I don't entirely agree on. And one reason why we think they took this approach was because they didn't have much community input in the creation of this plan. This plan came from city planning, came from the interests of city planning of building more with less restriction and less review from the community boards and the council members. And so, there's this common narrative that we hear, especially on Twitter, where we need more housing for prices to come down. I don't agree with that. With that mindset, there's a lot of other factors that play into affordability in our city. And so one of our biggest concerns is that with this proposal, that it doesn't really tackle the affordability crisis that we see not only in my district, but throughout the 5 boroughs. And so that kind of leads me into our next slide. What is this going to do? How are there going to be changes for higher densities throughout the city? The first approach, which I'm generally supportive of, is universal affordability preference, UAP. So UAP is the expansion and growth of the voluntary inclusionary housing, which was only zoned in certain neighborhoods in the city. However, UAP is going to be citywide, and the idea is that this is an optional program for developers if they want a little bit more FAR, if they want an additional story or two, that 1 story or 2 has to be affordable and permanently affordable. One of the biggest issues that I have with this is that it's an option, right? I don't believe a lot of developers will actually take this because if you look at my district alone, someone would rather have 100% luxury development than make it 80-20. And even 80-20, I feel like isn't enough. And we really were expecting and hoping for a mandated affordable housing option, changes to mandatory inclusionary housing, but we didn't get this. as part of this proposal. The next is that residential infill. In the original proposal, they're going to do infill in all types of campuses, whether it's former Mitchell-Lama campuses or public housing campuses. However, during the revision or one of the modifications that they made was that they are no longer going to do or create regulations to do infill in public housing developments. But this still allows a lot of infills, whether you're live in Stuytown or you live in Southbridge in my district or Independent Plaza. And so I believe any new infill is going to have a drastic change to the environment, to the character of the neighborhood. And I believe we should have a lot more findings to make sure that we still have light, we still have access to air, and it doesn't really drastically change, the framework of our neighborhoods. Another aspect of this proposal, which I think is really good, is the legalizations of SROs. SROs used to be widely popular, and they were one of the most affordable housing options for people who didn't have a large income, right? A lot of New Yorkers started their adventure in New York by living in the SROs. We eliminated that as a city a few decades ago, and so this proposal will actually legalize that. However, what they also want to do is to remove the dwelling unit factor. The dwelling unit factor is the average unit size that a building has to have. This makes sure that a one bedroom is a real one bedroom, right? That all buildings aren't just 100% studios. And so by eliminating that, it creates a really big fear that you can have buildings that are all SROs, and it limits the creation of new family size apartments. And so hopefully in the next few weeks, we can get some changes to that and we don't completely eliminate the dwelling unit factor for our city. One of the biggest changes is residential conversion. As we know in the financial district after 9/11, we were able to create a new community downtown because we are able to convert office spaces to residential uses. And this application would allow us to do it citywide, to really take advantage of the successful program. However, this is a massive change. And whenever a rezoning happens like this, the community gets something in return, whether it's mandated affordability, whether it's a school, like we got 5 new schools in Lower Manhattan when we were doing this big post 9/11 rezoning. With this conversion, with the approval of this conversion, we're giving developers an opportunity to do whatever they want without getting anything in return. And I really do think we needed to add mandated affordability for conversions from offices to residential. What are some other changes, especially in the outer boroughs, right? In the low density areas. So we're going to allow the FAR to increase with additional bonuses, right? So I mentioned UAP, they'll be able to build a little bit more, make sure that that's affordable if the developers want. But we're also going to allow more densities around transit. The idea around this is that we need more people to live around these areas that give them access to Manhattan or other business areas throughout the city. I'm generally supportive of this type of development, right? Because it lessens the use of cars and makes sure, and hopefully we get the investment in our public transportation to make this work. You're also going to see a concept called town centers. Town centers will allow most areas, especially in the outer boroughs, in Queens, in Brooklyn, where you see 1 or 2 story buildings, they're going to be able to add or create 4 or 5 stories buildings instead of that. One of the biggest issues, and if you heard the hearing today, a lot of the council members, especially from the Far Rockaways or Eastern Queens, was the elimination of parking mandates. Right now, when you do new developments, you have to make sure that you have enough parking spots for those residents. And so what they plan to do is to eliminate this requirement, but still allow developers, if they want to have parking spots in the development, to do it. They just won't require it. It's really controversial because there are a lot of areas in our city there are still transit deserts, and so people can't get from point A to point B without a car, and a lot of the car owners in the city council thought that this was sometimes a deal breaker for them to move forward with this proposal. Another thing that we're going to see, especially for residential areas, whether it's a one family house, is to allow ADUs. So allow different types of housing within one lot. For example, you could use your garage to be a new apartment. You can allow the basement apartments to be legalized. Your front yards can have a small, additional bedroom. They believe that this allows to increase densities of residential areas, maybe somewhere like southern Staten Island, but not too much density. And it also allows, these individual homeowners to either create a little bit more income, but it also allows people to age in place, right? If your grandparents wants to move back to, their children's home, they'll be able to build out an additional room in their house. However, there's a problem that I see allowing a lot more deregulations or a lot less controls when you allow new development, is that one thing that we have been seeing in my district over the years is that developers would choose to demolish their individual buildings if they're given a little bit more incentive to do so, right? And so part of this proposal is they're going to allow developers to go a little bit further back in their rear yards. It's going to allow them to have smaller windows. It's going to give them additional FAR, and that might be the tipping point for a developer or even a small landlord to say, maybe I'll demolish this fourth floor building with rent stabilized tenants because there's a lot of upside, right? I could get a lot more in return. And one thing, we see this every day in my district, right? People getting evicted, whether it's legally or legally. And I think this is scary when you actually talk to people in real life and you fear and you hear the pressures that people are facing because their landlord is trying to kick them out to generate a lot more profit. And so there are a few recommendations that people have made, not just myself, but other council members, a lot of civic groups, is to say, whether we can do it through this applications or outside commitments, is to rework MIH to make it better, right? Allow much more mandated affordability at deeper levels, so then we can actually try to solve this affordable housing crisis. One other commitments that I know other council members have been saying is to make sure that NYCHA property can be 100% affordable moving forward. As we see now in Chelsea, there's a new model coming up where they're going to allow to add market rate development in public land, which, is a scary thing because public land should be affordable and affordable for the most vulnerable. And so we have a group of council members that have been advocating to make sure that any future infill, any future redevelopment of NYCHA has to be 100% affordable. One of the changes that we can make within scope is make those changes to the rear yard reduction, or making sure that we keep our window distances similar to what they are today to limit the risk of demolition of these sites. And finally, we think that there should be some sort of maximum or minimum of how many SROs or studios you can have in a building. As I said earlier, there's a lot of fear that if we move forward with the elimination of the dwelling unit factor, that we can have 10-story buildings that are almost like college dormitories, and we kill the production of new family size unit. We want to make New York City available for every single type of person, every single type of family, and we have to make sure that we can control as much as we can as government the production that's going to fulfill the desire of every type of person or size of family to live here in our city. And so that's my whole presentation. I'm happy to have a quick discussion about what we learned today, I created this presentation before the 8-hour marathon hearing that we had today, but I know there are some things that Layla heard and saw that wants to bring up with me today.
Thank you so much, Council Member. It is very, very helpful. Before we continue the conversation, I think it will be useful for our audience to go through all these acronyms. I mean, we use them all the time, but our participants may not be as familiar with them. So MIH, go ahead, tell us what MIH stands for.
It's mandatory inclusionary housing. And so, as many of you remember, during the de Blasio administration, he wanted to mandate affordability. And so, whenever we rezone a neighborhood like Soho and NoHo for higher density, it triggers MIH, where new developments have to have a subset of affordable units in it.
Great. And then UAP.
I brought that up in the presentation as universal affordability preference. Is the option for developers to build a little bit more, but whatever they build, whether it's 1 story or 2 stories, all of that has to be affordable in perpetuity.
And the big difference between being that one is a mandate and the other one is a preference. So one is if you want to build, that's what you have to do. And the other one is, well, you know, if you want to build a little more, you can elect to apply this preference. DUF, I know that we've talked about it, but just a little refresher.
Yeah, so dwelling unit factor. So I believe the average for a dwelling unit factor building, it's an average, but it's around 680. So 680 square feet is that average that an apartment has to be in a building. Right now, they want to eliminate that. So you can have apartments in these, the average of an apartment in a new building be 250, square feet, right? You can have something that's much smaller than that. We look at cities like Tokyo, where people are living in tubes pretty much, or really micro, ultra micro apartments. And so I believe that we should have a mix of things. So by having some sort of average, it allows for 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, but also allows for, studio apartments as well.
Yeah, great. And then finally, SROs, which is also a typology that you mentioned.
Yeah, so SROs are, I think, single residential occupancy.
Occupancy, yeah.
And so that's made mostly for individual people. They're typically the lowest type of housing that we had in the past. It's illegal right now. And it allows someone to have a room. And sometimes they would share a bathroom or other common areas like a kitchen. If you look at some of the older tenement buildings on the Lower East Side in Chinatown, you remember that they'll have like a bathroom in the hallway and maybe 3 different apartments would use that bathroom. And so it's a way to create smaller units for people who need it or want that type of lifestyle.
Great. Terrific. So let's jump right in to the core of what is in front of us. What I found interesting today is that a number of your colleagues actually emphasized the fact that in the end, it is going to be fairly modest. That was a comment that was really recurrent. And in terms of the number of units that this proposal expects to create, I have to say that, I was also surprised. We were told by the department that it would create between 80,000 and 110,000 units in the course of 15 years. So if you bring it down to, let's say that it's a totally equitable proposal, one of your colleagues actually did the math and came to the conclusion that it would be approximately 78 to 108 units per district and per year. So it seems actually pretty modest in terms of housing production, with the understanding that this production would have no guarantee that it would be affordable. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because it looks like we're giving a lot away, including, the size of our units, the quality of our housing with smaller windows, less light coming into our apartments, possibly lesser quality at the street level with taller buildings, possibly impact on sewers. That was something that was raised numerous times during the hearing today. And we're only getting that many units. I mean, is there a little bit of a disconnect between the tools that are pretty blunt and imposed on New Yorkers and the outcome?
It's modest depending who you ask, right? If you are a council member and you represent a mostly residential community, this is going to be probably the largest density increase that you have seen in 60 years, right? The last time we changed our zoning text as a city was 60 years ago. And I think that's an additional fear too, right? We don't know when we're going to have an opportunity to do what we're doing today, probably in our lifetime, right? And so I think we do need it. That's why I wanted us as a city to make sure that we would mandate it, because we don't know, especially when it comes to affordability, because we don't know when we're going to have this opportunity again. For my district, I do think there could be some drastic changes. As I mentioned, allowing developers and landlords to have an additional space where they can make profit could be the tipping factor if someone chooses to demolish a building. And even when people and when our city talks about the affordable housing that's going to be created out of this plan, it doesn't include the units that would be lost due to eviction, due to demolition. The units they're only counting are new ones that would be created through UAP. And so I think, yes, the numbers could be modest, right, for a city, but it can have drastic changes, right? And it also has a drastic change on how we review, how we get community input on these proposals, right? We're going to allow a lot more as of right. And depending where you live, that change could be drastic, right? Many of us have sat through community board meetings where even 2 additional stories, let's say in a special district like Little Italy, can really be a big deciding factor on the character of that community.
Yeah, no, very, very, very true. Actually, we see a trend in Chelsea where very wealthy individuals actually acquire a series of buildings and then they convert them into mansions. So, a building that we have the instance on 23rd Street, the building contained, I think, 18 residential units, and I think they were rent regulated. The building was acquired, was entirely vacated, and now it is being redeveloped with a modest addition, 1 story or maybe 2, which is, once again, because it is in a contextual district, actually a pretty significant change, and it is being converted into a single occupancy home. It's a mansion. So I think that getting more data about the loss of housing units is something that is critical. And I think that we're hoping certainly that the Department of City Planning is able to analyze that information, because as you said, we may end up having less units as a result. But let's pivot a little bit, and right now it is in its final stretch. It is in front of the City Council. We certainly saw on display today that that there was grave concerns that were expressed by your colleagues and by including by you. It was sort of like ranging so many different issues. Parking, impact to sewers. We heard a lot about building in flood zones, building in areas that are not in flood zones, but flood nonetheless. Is the data really accurate on that? And we could see something along the lines of each council member decides to negotiate a very specific, angle and concern. And we may end up, or let me ask you the question, do we take the risk of ending up with a text that would be actually gutted of, and any of its substance, and then what's the point?
Yeah, so I think there's three possible avenues that this can go, right? Um, the avenue that I think that has least possibility is for it to be voted as it is, right? Today we heard dozens on dozens of complaints from my colleagues from all across the city, whether you're low density, high density, whether you use a car or don't use a car, there was a lot of concerns with this application. And so I don't expect it to pass in its current form. I think there's a second avenue, right, where there's some changes that happens to, whether it's not eliminating the parking mandate or making sure that there's some sort of dwelling unit factor size in buildings, plus a lot of support, right? One of the biggest asks from these council members was, all right, if you're really committed on solving the affordability crisis, show us the money, right? Like zoning is just one part of the change, right? We need billions of dollars to really house every New Yorker that we want. And so I think there could be a path where this application gets watered down, but then there's a lot of commitments that are out of scope that are made by this administration, and it could probably get to a majority of the city council. And then there's a third path that it's only City of Yes in the title, and the application is super watered down. The number of units that are going to be created are much, much smaller. The changes are much less, and the mayor just celebrates the passing of City of Yes, but it really isn't the application that was presented to us in the beginning of this process. And so I think those are the three avenues. I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle. I don't think there's enough council members that support the application right now to move it forward. And so I think in the next few weeks, we are going to see a lot of give and takes and back and forths and changes to the application.
I think that there is a risk for, I call that the Swiss cheese paradox. The more Swiss cheese you have, the more holes you have. The more holes you have, the less cheese you have. So, I know it's a paradox, but basically, the more we're going to dig holes into the proposal, the less of a merits of the proposal we're going to get, if we thought that there were any merits to start off with. And then we will be left with nothing, or possibly with stuff that is actually not so good, including, infill buildings on campuses that, would not go through ULURP, or with, smaller windows, less regulation that actually makes the city livable. Is there a path where the city council would vote no?
That would be hard to see, especially under the speakership, this administration. But there are coalitions within the council that are forming. And I want to really bring up what happened during economic opportunity. There is a group of council members that represent manufacturing districts. And even though the changes to manufacturing districts were outside of the scope of the economic opportunity text amendment, they said, city planning, we want you to make commitments, strong commitments, that you're going to protect our manufacturing zone. And so Councilmember Alexa Vilas, Jennifer Gutierrez, and other council members came together and gave city planning a list of demands that they wanted to see in a separate, text amendment or ULURP for their districts. And that commitment is being fulfilled as we speak today. And so I think we are seeing kind of alignment of council members, especially ones that are asking for affordability. Or council members, there was a letter that went out 2 days ago of asking for new home ownership models, right? Can we get a new version of Mitchell-Lama? Can we help people buy new apartments, right? Can we give a tax incentives? You also see a lot of council members, especially today, talk about sewage, right? They don't have the infrastructure to have higher density in their communities. And so you do see the formation of these coalitions. I think it's still early. I think tomorrow is going to be really important of which council member chooses what they're going to fight for or what their priority is. But we do see some alignment. And so I don't think it's going to be, 25 council members getting specific wants for them. I think we're going to start seeing some groups form and bigger pushes after tomorrow.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think that for folks who don't do that, as their bread and butter, the notion that something is out of scope is actually very critical, because the city council at this particular juncture, and I'm speaking under your supervision, council member, but you can only either accept something, refuse something, or modify it so long as it was in the initial proposal. You cannot all of a sudden say, for example, oh, we want a housing mandate. That would be deemed out of scope. But at the same time, while it is, on a technical level, it's correct what you're saying, and which I think is very important for our audience tonight, who really wants to know how they can get involved. It's like, don't get discouraged because it's out of scope. That this proposal is not the end of it. There is always tomorrow. There's always the day after the vote. And even if the vote is not exactly what we wanted, there is still a great opportunity for more advocacy, right?
And I'm going to add one more thing. I'm going to be frank. We have a really unpopular mayor, right? And this proposal is his legacy. There are very few council members that want to help the mayor in his situation. And so it makes it much harder for the administration to pass the current version of City of Yes, right? And so, we can talk zoning and the changes and what we think will be good and what will be bad, but there's also a lot of political implications. And so council members who represent districts where the mayor is not popular, do they want to support an application like this? Or council members that have different ideological stances from the mayor, do they want to be seen supporting the mayor at this point in his administration? And so I think there's a lot of factors in play. I think it's important to always figure out what we want to change in scope, but it's also equally as important what we can get or what changes out of scope to make sure that we get something that's much better than it's being presented right now.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good and important point. So to that end, is there, given that 2025 is going to be an election year for New York, and that actually there's a fair number of yourself and your colleagues who are actually going to run for re-election and are likely to serve a second term. Isn't there an appeal actually for them to actually, give the opportunity to whoever will be the mayor in 2026 to actually do a big, ambitious housing plan and do it right, and therefore to really reduce the amount of approval that they give to this one, because you can't do this kind of, ambitious citywide, housing policy change every 4 years. It's not doable. And we know then that, the Department of City Planning has been working so hard, and, we actually share appreciation for all the work that has gone into it. But, maybe under a different administration, we would come up with better policy recommendations.
I think that's definitely an option, but like all ULERs, we have a clock that's ticking, and so we have to focus on the now, and make sure that we can fight for what's best for our communities and for the city. And I think that's why we all can be hopeful of who will be the next mayor, what the next majority in the council could be, but this application is in front of us, and we have to really tackle it head on.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I want to say that we have 122 participants on the call, and I want to thank all of you for being here. And we have a Q&A button. So if you have not yet figured it out, it should be at the bottom of your screen, and you can drop questions for Council Member Marte. So we will get to questions from participants at the end of this session. But I have a couple additional questions for you, Council Member. The accessory dwelling unit raised a number of issues today at the council hearing about the tax valuation that would be put in place on these units. And this is something that, we understand that, it is a zoning proposal, but it has multiple implications in, to other areas that are not under DCP regulation. Do we take a risk actually of putting a fiscal burden on homeowners who tend to be minority and low income?
Yeah, I think we heard it today. A lot of the council members from Staten Island, from Eastern Queens, was asking city planning and HPD, do you know what's going to happen? Have you done that study, how it's going to impact these homeowners? And I don't think we got good responses. And a lot of these council members are hearing from their community board, are hearing from these residents who are asking the questions to their insurance companies. What's going to happen? What's going to happen to my flood insurance? What's going to happen to if I have, 2 new units that I'm renting out in my property? How does that impact my insurance coverage? Or even how does it impact how high my tax rate goes up next year? And so we didn't get all the responses that we were looking for today, but I know a lot of these council members, before they vote, they want a concrete response.
Yeah, because it was unclear, but it seemed to suggest that whether you build it or not, the fact that it becomes available, that you're zoned for it, may actually have an impact on your property taxes.
Yeah, that's what my colleagues were saying.
Yeah, interesting. So to broaden a little bit the outlook on this proposal, I found it very interesting and insightful. Chair Gorodnik actually mentioned that New York is going through a housing crisis, and that this housing crisis is really dire and needs to be addressed. And he said that, the housing crisis is in part caused by, or in large part caused by, the lack of supply, and that adding supply is the tool that the department has chosen to actually alleviate it. And he said, those who have the power actually to rent or buy usually get those units that those who can afford less don't get. And it was, I find it really interesting because it is so true and so obvious. And yet this proposal leaves everybody on the same footing and having to compete and fend for themselves, where basically the market is deemed to be able to address a social issue. Speak a little bit about that. Is the supply and is the market actually in the business of addressing affordability and housing?
The biggest business in New York City is real estate. And real estate has never corrected itself here, right? We've only seen land value increase. We've seen whenever a developer has an opportunity to build, a luxury apartment or an affordable unit, they go with the luxury apartment. And so I don't believe that increasing supply is actually going to correct the market that we're in, right? And it's not going to correct the market 5 years from now, 10 years from now. When you look at my district alone, we have produced probably some of the most housing units of this city. I talked about 9/11 earlier, where we produced tens of thousands of new apartments. Essex Crossing built 5,000 new units on the Lower East Side. We even new massive luxury towers like One Manhattan Square has hundreds of units in it. But we've seen rents in our community continue to only skyrocket. We see the same in Long Island City. We see the same in Greenpoint. And so I believe it's not only a supply issue, right? It's what type of supply. And I think that's why we need to make sure, especially as a government, to force these private developers to build affordable housing, especially for our lowest income New Yorkers. Right now, when you look at our shelter system, it's overcapacity. But many people in our shelter system are working. Over 70% of the people in our shelter system go to work every single day. They just can't afford to live in the city anymore. And I don't believe that this trickle down economic policy is actually going to make housing available for them. We have to come in, and whether we build our own housing like we have in the past that has been successful, like Mitchell-Lama and public housing, or highly subsidize new units through voucher programs, or force developers to build that housing. I think that's the only way we get out of this housing crisis.
Do you think that the union can become a partner? Because they were very influential in a number of Mitchell-Lama and limited equity co-ops, including Penn South, that remains a model of permanent affordable housing in the heart of Chelsea. It's 5,000 folks who live there and have had the stability of housing. This is there a partnership and a relationship to foster with unions? Do they have a role to play there?
Of course, some of our best affordable housing developments, even in my district, were union built, right? Hillman, Amalgamated, the Grand Street, East River Park co-ops, all union built. Actually, next month, I'm going to be introducing a social housing resolution to support the creation of a new social housing authority in New York State, where we will work with unions to actually build new affordable housing. That's out of scope of the application, but that's something that people are committed to doing because we know it has worked in the past and it will work in the future.
Lots of people are talking about the Vienna model of housing production. Is it something that would inspire that could inspire policies for New York?
It should. And we see with that dialogue constantly increase, right? Where the government has to do a lot more because we can't just give away, our public land to private developers, right? We have to make sure that we have a say in making sure that the city works for everyone. I was talking to a class of sixth graders last week, and all the teachers in the school lived in subsidized housing or public housing. And that's who we have to think about when we're thinking about who is new housing for, right? It should be for these people that make our city run, whether it's our, FDNY firefighters or our teachers or our nurses. We need them in the city to make sure that we can thrive and be successful.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. So I see that there are lots of questions in the Q&A box. I really encourage all the participants to ask your questions. We're going to try to address as many of them as possible. But before we jump into the questions, tomorrow is the big public hearing. Give a little bit of a sense of what we can expect and what role do we, members of the public, stakeholders, constituents, can play in shaping the outcome of this proposal.
I think tomorrow is extremely important. If there's any part of this application that you support or have a problem with, tomorrow is your moment to share it with every single council member. We saw the impact of community boards all throughout the city saying no to this application or saying no with some changes, and that has major influence on how council members vote. A lot of the issues that we brought up today come directly from what we heard from constituents from our community board. And so if you believe we need to have bigger apartments for families, come and say that, because we are going to see drastic changes to this application but only if people come out and advocate and organize for what they want. As I continue to mention this throughout today, is that we saw a lot of changes to the economic opportunities because people came out and asked for those changes to be implemented. And right now, the council does not have the votes to move forward with this. And so we need to hear from you to make sure that whatever the final product is, it helps the majority of New Yorkers. And so whether you have a small change that you want to see in scope, or if you want to talk about something that's completely out of scope, how we could get MIH to be better, come and say it, because that could be part of the final agreement to the vote that we have in the city council.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And, we will make sure that we send an email to everyone telling you exactly how you can testify. But, the rundown is you can testify in person. The hearing starts tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. It will be skillfully chaired by Chair Riley, who was incredibly gracious and patient today. And who is the chair of the subcommittee on zoning and franchises. You can testify on Zoom, and you can also testify by phone. We'll make sure that we send all this information to the participants with links so that you know where to go and what to do. Your testimony will be limited to 2 minutes per person. So let's jump into some of the questions we have received in the chat. We have a question from let me see, Roger Manning, who is asking a question about open space. The proposal could actually trigger the pretty drastic reduction of open space, whether it is campuses such as Mitchell-Lama or NYCHA, or a church or a school that is underutilized. This open space could actually see the development of buildings. And we learned actually today that these infill programs, which currently do not exist, would actually not go through ULURP. So that was also something that some of your colleagues were not totally pleased with, because that will, be less opportunity for community boards and council members to actually weigh in. So speak a little bit about the impact of City of Yes on open space.
I think you did a great job in breaking it down, honestly. It is a huge threat to open space, right? I think the city is allowing developers to build practically wherever is possible, especially with the reduction of window sizes, the reduction of the distance between buildings, just allow a lot more areas for development. I think Stuytown is a really great example. If you ever walk through it, there's a lot of developments, but there's beautiful green spaces, there's playgrounds. Some of those playgrounds under this proposal will get new developments. And so we can see a drastic decrease on the amount of open space and green space that some of these campuses have. There's bigger places like Co-op City, which are like massive campuses, and we could see a lot more development on their open space. So it is a threat, but this is why we need people to testify, right? You have the lived experience of living in these communities, in these campuses, and you appreciate the quality of life that you have there. And so I think the best way to advocate for yourself is to show up, and also to support the council members who are fighting for you. There's a lot of council members that don't want to see this type of infill. So go and say, I agree with X council member from my district on X, Y, and Z.
That's actually a very good point. I think that we all, residents of New York City are represented by one council member, but we can actually go and support and share, our appreciation with, those 50 council members when they're actually doing the right thing. You don't represent my district, Councilmember Marte, but you and I have had conversations, and I've always been very appreciative. We can actually have these conversations and talk to council members from boroughs that we don't even live in, and I really urge participants on this call to do exactly that. Of course, write to your council member if you are a resident of New York, but engaging with those who are forming these coalitions that support the policy that you support is also a great way to make your voice heard. So there is a comment that is framed as a rhetorical question. Citizens are exhausted with politics driving our policy. Is it possible for the city council to think of the greater good of the city instead of only what is good for the districts? That may be a rhetorical question. Elected officials' interests are being reelected, and I realize there may be modifications, but can the council think of the best conclusion for the city?
Yeah, that's a load. Sometimes I get exhausted too, especially following all the levels of government, right? Especially leading up to the November election. But this is important, right? And I think, we do have to make sure that we're doing the best for all New Yorkers, right? Even though I represent Lower Manhattan, when I make that vote, whenever it is in November, it's going to be based off whether this is helping, someone that lives in the South Bronx, like my grandma, cousins that live in Corona, Queens, right? I'm going to take, their perspective and their consideration, how it's drastically going to change where they live, as part of my vote, right? Of course, there's a lot of changes that I want to see in my district as well, but we have to really think about the greater good, right? And I think for me, that's always and will always be affordable housing and finding ways to get there.
Yeah, no, very, very true and very, very on point. I think we all get tired and discouraged, but we need to find the energy among ourselves and, feed each other. It's also great, as you underscored with the housing, with the economic opportunity, to see that there were actually really substantial changes that came out of the text. So, we don't have to, throw our hands and say, well, nothing's going to work. It does work. Maybe not to the extent of what we were expecting, but, we were able, with the help of the great council members, to make changes. So another question that comes across in the Q&A is actually the fear that New York is being taken over by corporate landlords, and that those corporate landlords, whether it is, venture capitalists, or very large corporations that maybe own thousands of units elsewhere in Texas or Georgia, or have finally realized that New York may actually be an incredibly lucrative market, and may actually see a lot of benefits in this deregulation. And I think that the rent regulated housing submarket is particularly vulnerable to these predatory tactics.
Yeah, we see it, we've seen it in the past decade, right? BlackRock, Blackstone have repositioned their portfolios to take up more rent stabilized buildings in Manhattan and in New York City. And so where we are today, it is a private landlord, private developer driven model. And I think that's why we need more regulation. I don't believe giving as of right development to these private landlords, right? Because they're going to do whatever is best for them and their shareholders. And that's typically the bottom line. And so I believe we should have more oversight. And, as Layla mentioned, we were able to achieve that in economic opportunity. At one point, we were going to give away every storefront in a NYCHA development, where anything could go there, didn't have to be called up by a council member. but we formed a coalition of council members who represent public housing development and said, no, we know how this will go if we don't have a say. And so that's why we really need to work, especially during the next few weeks, to make sure that we don't give everything away. And then in certain aspects, especially like infill, hopefully we can have a little bit more oversight for those applications.
Yeah, because the other big fear is that what is defined as affordable housing is actually based on a metrics that is incredibly skewed, and that actually is not affordable to lots of New Yorkers. And the more New York welcomes wealthy residents, the more the AMI goes up. And therefore, the harder it is for people who are on fixed income or who are low income earners to actually stay in the city. So when you create an affordable housing unit that would be reserved for someone who earns 60% of the AMI, if your AMI keeps going up because the city is gentrifying so much and people who live here are making much more money, it becomes untenable. So how can we advocate for maybe a redefinition of the AMI? And I know that it's not the purview of the city. HUD actually is the agency that has oversight on that. But give us some your thoughts on how we can advocate for actually true permanent affordability in New York.
Yeah, well, the good thing is certain council members already have been doing it. There's been a few rezonings that are currently in the process where council members are saying, I don't want the averages to be based on a citywide average. I want to make sure that we have a local average of our community board or of our zip code or of the area that's going to be rezoned. And that's the type of affordable housing that we need there. And so I think having more of those conversations and those push are the only way we're going to add truly affordable housing to our city. As you said, even rezonings, and I think Chair Salamanca brought this up earlier today, there's rezoning that he approved in 2017, and the AMI, when he approved that, was $700 for a studio unit. Now, that same studio unit that hasn't been developed yet is going to go for $1,200. And so, that $500 gap is the difference of whether someone who needs housing can live there or can live there or not. And so that's why I always believe in doing a more localized approach, whether it's community board, zip code, or the specific area that's going to be rezoned.
And do you think that because we hear that a lot also, oh, it's too much of a burden for developers and therefore they're not going to build. Do you buy this argument?
I don't in my district, we developers are always gonna come to the table trying to get 100%, maybe more than 100% of what they can, right? And it's our job to chip away at that. It's our job to make sure that we get something that's more in favorable of the people that will live in that development and for our greater community. You know, One thing people have constantly told me in my, through almost 3 years in office is that it's impossible to build 100% affordable housing development in Lower Manhattan. Well, 2 weeks ago, I was at a ribbon cutting where we did just that. So it is possible to really, put the pressure not just on developers, but also on the city to make sure that they support this type of approach when we create new housing.
And what is, in your opinion, the reason why developers have been so successful at, saying that, it is too difficult, can't do it, this is the maximum we can do, we need more tax incentives, it doesn't pencil out. They've been really good at, pushing this narrative.
I think because they've been helped by their allies. right? There is, a coalition of groups that support this pro-development mindset and say, we rather have 100% luxury development than nothing at all. And I think that does a lot of injustice to people who actually want affordable housing and a livable city. And so that's why they get away with it, right? Because they have supporters that support uh, their narrative and their purpose to generate as much money, and they're a huge special interest, right? There are a lot of elected officials that are scared come election time that they're going to get attack ads from these, pro real estate PACs, and that has a huge influence as well.
Staying a little bit longer on this topic, I have noticed that the media has been rather sympathetic to the proposal. What do you make of that?
I think generally the media has been supportive of this kind of like pro-development mindset, and I think a lot of it is because we haven't been able to put our narrative out there in a way where it will be accepted by the mainstream media, right? And I think a lot of the fights that we have in our communities are super localized, right? We're fighting for an individual 100% housing development, or we're trying to stop this massive luxury tower that's going to displace thousands of residents, right? A lot of the fights that many people have this call, it's like a neighborhood fight, it's a community fight, and because we don't have all the time in the world and limited resources, we don't tackle this as a citywide approach. I know there's a lot of activists and organizers that are coming together to try to achieve that, but we have limited resources, and the other side has unlimited amount of resources, and so it's really hard. It is a David versus Goliath fight, but we do see a lot of wins, over the years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have another question about the process that DCP led, and the question is, in your opinion, Council Member, was there enough time? Did DCP do a good job explaining things? And would you change anything for the next citywide tax amendment?
We did not have enough time. I don't think there's ever been an administration that has done 3 citywide rezonings in 2.5 years, right? Most administrations do 1 citywide rezoning in 8 years. Some don't do any at all. And so what we've been through has been a headache, a burden on our community boards, on activists, on organizers. It's been, don't cry for me, but it's been hard for a lot of council members, especially council members who aren't, proficient in land use and zoning, and, from learning how carbon neutrality will impact, uh, the development or the expansion of like electric charging vehicles to economic opportunity and figuring out what type of uses works and which neighborhoods we can look at to create models for the city, to now where we have this housing opportunity, and just to figure out what is a net positive for our city, right? And it takes a lot of work to figure out whether if this is good for greater New Yorkers and not just for our specific districts. So it's definitely been too fast. They've put a lot of pressures on communities to make a decision really quickly. And just think about this application alone, thousands of pages. We are one of the few council office that has a full-time land use director that was able to go through every single line. Most council members don't have that. And so it has been really hard to figure out every single detail of all these applications.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because it is a incredibly dense proposal. It's also really, really difficult to read. The level of changes, some of it is absolutely totally innocuous, but until you know that it is innocuous, you still need to read it with a super critical mind. And we're always looking for, where did they hide the poison pill? And it is incredibly difficult for a layperson to actually even comprehend the text. And on that topic, there is one issue that has not been discussed much, but I wanted to, bring it to you. I mean, I'm sure it is on your radar, but wanted to bring it to the attention of the participants tonight, is the mapping, the creation of two new residential zoning districts, R11 and R12. R11 would be a 15 residential FAR, and R12 would be an 18 residential FAR. For point of comparison, the Empire State Building is a 15 FAR building. So that's what 15 FAR looks like. It's the Empire State Building filled with housing. What is interesting and a little troubling is that under this new residential zoning, once it is mapped, meaning that we apply it to a certain territory, certain area of New York, then as of right, developers would be allowed to build a 12 FAR, which is currently not permitted as of right. You can build 10, and if you want to go to 12, this additional 2 FAR has to be affordable. Now you could build 12, and then the additional 3 that would bump you to 15 would be affordable. It took me forever to actually find it, understand the language, double check that indeed that's what it meant. And so my question to you is, are you concerned about these two new zoning typologies? And also, is it possible that we missed some stuff altogether?
It is possible. My team has been through every single line, and we have worked with really smart zoning experts like George Janes, who was at almost every single community board meeting, has talked to my office in the middle of the process, almost on a weekly basis, to make sure that nothing was missed. But there is a lot of fear because I don't know if my colleagues know what you just mentioned, right? And so I think that's why tomorrow is important, to not only have residents come and say what they believe needs to happen, but also allow experts to come and fill in the gaps and educate some of the council members that may have just been focusing on their specific district, but haven't been focused on what can happen in my district, right? Or what can happen in Councilmember Botcher's or Keith Power's district, right? And as you said, we already have tall buildings in Manhattan, and they're only going to allow these buildings to be much, much taller. And so the next time you run in Central Park, look at the tallest building. Like, we're just going to allow a lot more of that in different areas. But you brought up a good point. It does have to be rezoned in a certain area, and I think that's the next step, right? They're allowing this new group to be applicable in New York City, but there still has to be a rezoning process to allow that type of FAR.
Yeah, I think it would be much more prudent to, set the rules the correct way so that when it's finally mapped, we don't have to, pull such a big fight, because, it seems to be pretty common sense that, if the goal is to create affordable housing, then any bonus should be affordable. And that, is sort of like the common sense. If we start to say, well, it's only some of it, we can allow some of it to be market rate, then it becomes, a little bit more murky. But yeah, the fight never stops, and we keep we need to keep the stamina for that, for sure. I think we have time for one more question. Then it's 7:45, so I want to be mindful of everybody's time, including the fact that you guys now have to write a 2-minute statement so that you can testify tomorrow. We didn't talk too much about cars and the parking mandate. So this has been a big topic in today's conversation. The parking mandate that currently exists, which means that you build a building in certain parts of the city, you must build a parking space. And what this text would do is that it would eliminate the mandate. It doesn't mean that parking would no longer be permittable, but it would be at the discretion of the developer. And that has caused a lot of consternation. Speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, even though I live in an area, I represent an area that's probably the most transit rich, that's a rarity in the council, right? We have a lot of council members that represent areas where there is no public transportation. Council member Linda Lee does not have a subway or a rail line that stops in her district. Everyone has to move by car. That's the only way you get from point A to point B. There's a lot of areas in Staten Island. And so when you eliminate this parking mandate, people feared that we don't have enough transit or good transportation to connect people to their jobs, to connect people to their supermarkets. And it's just creating a greater burden on street parking. And so it has been really controversial. What city planning would say, instead of creating those extra parking spaces in the basement of a building or right behind a 5-story residential development, that can be housing, which can help house more people, right? And so, it's going to be interesting to see how that conversation moves forward. I know there's a lot of council members that have drawn the line in the sand of saying, if they eliminate this, then I'm not supporting this application, no matter how good it looks on other areas. For my district, we don't need a parking mandate, right? Like I could leave my office right now and take 2 buses that can take me to Battery Park City in 10 minutes. And so, there are council members like Lincoln Ressler who also say we're transit rich. We don't have to have parking minimums because it works for those districts, but there's other districts that it completely doesn't work for.
Yeah, no, that makes a whole lot of sense. Coming back to the one size sometimes fits none rather than all. Which is, I think, a big challenge that we see with the text. Council member, thank you so much. Give us some parting words on, what we should be doing tomorrow and in the coming weeks until the vote. And we understand the vote will be sometime in November. If the vote is not what some of us feel is the bare minimum, we shall not despair. There are other things we can do. Give us a little bit of hope on how to apprehend these coming days and weeks.
Yeah, if you want to see change to the city of Yes housing opportunity, it starts tomorrow. Everyone has their own perspective on what they think is best for New York City, what's best for their block, what's best for their neighborhood. But we won't know that if you don't show up. And as I mentioned, there has been a lot of changes that have been made to previous application because individual people have either come to City Hall or logged on to Zoom to testify. I'm going to be there all day tomorrow. I know there's other council members that are going to be there all day tomorrow just to make sure that we can cross our T's and dot our I's and make sure that we understand the complex application this is, right? So be optimistic. There's a lot of change that can happen. I know people have to be patient to wait their turn, but testifying over Zoom is a great way to have your voice be heard, right? Or if you can't join in person, if you can't join over Zoom, email your testimony to all the council members or just your local council member, right? I feel like this is if we miss this opportunity, we're never going to be able to get it back. We have one day to listen to the public. I know that's far too short. We should have weeks to do so. But that's what we have, and I really ask for you guys to really show up and tell us what you think.
Terrific. I think it's spot on, the perfect parting words. Council member, thank you so much for your time. I know that you had a very, very long day, so we really appreciate that. On top of this, you agreed to be with us and spend part of your evening with us. Thank you for always fighting for the greater good. It is much appreciated. And thank you for coming tomorrow and spending yet another day in the chamber and listening so that members of the public can not only speak, but also feel that they're being heard. So much appreciation. Thank you so much. I want to thank the Historic Districts Council who co-sponsored this evening. And I want to thank all our participants. We still have 100 participants on the call. That really is a testament to how interested New Yorkers are on this particular subject. As the council member said, we need to speak up. This is really the important way how we can shape policy in New York City. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good evening. And hopefully I will see you tomorrow in the chamber. Good night.